Welcome back. So far we have touched upon the origins of words, the fundamental building blocks of all narratives that create and shape our lives. Then we've examined some aspects of our sense of space and place. But everything exists in the fourth dimension, that of time. So that was our third lesson. Now we turn to a series on our sense of self, who we are as the key characters in nearly all the narratives that we author. But first, let us drop back a bit and look at how single-cell organisms evolved into multicell organisms and in the process began to acquire gender. If we look at Vulvacine algae, they are like a time machine because in the relatively brief period of 200 million years, this group evolved from free-living single-cell ancestors into a variety of multicellular life forms. In doing so, a reproductive process evolved that is surprisingly familiar. These algae, made up of about 2,000 cells, exist as distinct male and females. The males produce sperm that fertilize the eggs of the females, producing a zygote that develops into an embryo. Researchers have established that the first sex genes appeared in mammals about 180 million years ago. Though it has always been there, it was first noted that the X chromosome was special in 1890 by Hermann Henking in Leipzig. In 1901, Clarence Irwin McClung suggested that the X chromosome was involved in sex determination. So we human beings are bifurcated into at least two versions, female and male. Being a boy or girl for most children is something that feels very natural. At birth, babies are assigned male and female identities based upon physical characteristics. This refers to the sex or assigned gender of the child. Self-recognition of gender identity develops over time, much the same way a child's physical body does. But then there is the concept of gender identity, which refers to an internal sense people have of who they are that comes from an interaction of biological traits, developmental influences, and environmental conditions. Gender identity typically develops in stages. Around age 2, children become conscious of the physical differences between boys and girls. Before their third birthday, most children can easily label themselves as either boy or girl. By age 4, most children have a stable sense of their gender identity. Those identities are shaped and regulated by societal norms and have been evolving over time. For example, women in the ancient Greek world had few rights in comparison to male citizens, unable to vote, own land, or inherit property. A woman's place was in the home and her purpose in life was the rearing of children. Considering their limited role in actual society, there is a surprisingly strong cast of female characters in Greek religion and mythology. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and patron of Athens, stands out as a powerful figure blessed with intelligence, courage, and honor. Again, common to most ancient cultures where agriculture was crucial to the community, female fertility goddesses were extremely important and particularly venerated. Persephone, aka Corian, was the Greek goddess of vegetation, especially grain, and the wife of Hades, with whom she rules the underworld. As in other ancient male-dominated literature, women are often cast as troublemakers, from jealous Hera to Aphrodite, employing her charms to make men lose their wits. Myths and literature abound with female characters trying their best to derail the plans of male heroes, from the supreme witch Medea to the deadly, if lovely, sirens. Such views were evident in early Christian perspectives revealed in biblical scripture. Essentially, Christians came to believe that a woman was considered owned by a master. A woman was always under the authority of a man, her father, her brothers, her husband, and since she did not inherit, eventually her eldest son. This began to change a bit at the time of the Protestant Reformation. For Martin Luther, marriage is the first order of God and nevertheless a worldly thing, meaning that he believed that the union of man and woman was basically governed as a civil activity. In his opinion, all women should be married, and as quickly and as early as possible, so that their husbands could lead them and restrain them from sinfulness. Everyone should live in the state of matrimony, as willed by God. Man and women are destined to produce and raise offspring. Therefore, marriage stands under God's special blessing. But Luther also maintained that both partners in marriage are equally obliged to make their bodies available for conjugal duties. Married life became strictly regulated by the civil Protestant authorities. As a consequence of the Reformation, matrimonial and moral courts were established, mainly in the towns, whose purpose was to exercise strict control over sexuality and everyday married life. The Protestant Reformers' study of Scripture and the resulting conviction of the equality of all believers before God led them to initiate changes in the way education, the church, family, and societal structures were conceived. As a result of the Reformation, women were given new opportunities to be educated, participate in the church and in the family, and share the gospel. Martin Luther proclaimed the priesthood of all believers, teaching that both men and women were equal before God and free to pursue their God-given vocational calling. Women were taught how to look after children, care for their homes, make clothing for her family, and tend livestock. The change was that women were now encouraged to study the Bible in vernacular language, to be a biblical influence for children and with their husbands. By allowing women to become educated and read the Bible, they found passages suggesting that women were equal to men in the presence of God. The Swedish Church Ordinance of 1571 mandated the education of girls along with the boys. Still, there had to be accommodations to the earlier perspectives and narratives about the nature of authority and power. For example, Elizabeth I of England was a woman, and therefore Parliament decided to make her the supreme governor of the Church of England instead of the supreme head of the Church of England. Over time, the roles and status of women has changed due to both societal changes and the efforts of women themselves to claim fuller citizenship in the worlds they inhabit. We may return to some of these developments in greater detail in future lessons. Still, today our narratives overwhelmingly employ gender-designated terms like boys and girls, men and women, which both consciously and unconsciously help to create what many of us accept as our special and unique identities. A recent list of goals for sustainable development put forth by the United Nations, goal number 5 reads, "Gender equity is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world." One wonders how our narratives and thinking might change if we merely used the larger and more inclusive term for men and women and merely referred to them as humans. Might that help to confer human rights on everyone, regardless of biological differences? Thank you very much for your kind attentions. Please use your hearts and minds for good and useful purposes, and please stay healthy.